So thank you and welcome back. So yesterday, the Coleman Institute held a full-day workshop, and the workshop was centered around implications and developments on machine learning. And this is an area that we're really interested in seeing because the implications for this community are so vast, but yet we haven't had meaningful conversations about how we can integrate. Look at you. Thank you, Sue. So today we're going to have a moderated session with some of the participants of that workshop to talk through with you what were the developments and what we see coming in the future in this particular area of machine learning. And to kick it off, I'm going to hand it off to our founding donor, Bill Coleman.
So we've got to hold the button down while we talk. So first, thank you all for coming. I think it's been a very interesting day so far, exciting. So yesterday, we had an all-day panel that Clayton chaired from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. About machine learning. What's the implications and potential benefits for machine learning for people with cognitive disability? It was an exciting day. There were about 20 participants. They included industry, big companies like Facebook and Google and IBM, and self-advocates, government officials, legal experts. So it was a really broad-ranging discussion. But, when we founded the Institute, it had a couple of concepts, thinking. And the beginnings of it was actually 20 years ago right now, where I first came to see you and met with Clayton and a couple of others. And it was the concept that over the next 20 or 30 years, the evolution of the cloud, the evolution of mobile computing would allow, if we had the right services and support and systems, to be able to develop what we call a prothesis for life. The ability, because we expected that the mobile devices would be virtually free, everybody would have them, to be able to provide the assistance, the capabilities that people could live a better quality of life. The other part of it was that if we didn't catalyze this such that it wasn't different for people with cognitive disabilities than for everybody else, we'd have the same problems we've always had with assistive technology. They're one-offs, they can't build on one another. You heard the stories this morning about how pushing the button and hearing a sound doesn't work for you. So the interesting part here is we're now coming into an era where communications is free. Everybody's got a smart device, and if they don't, they will soon. And two things are happening. One is the world is waking up so you can interact with it, and it's called the Internet of Things. All of these devices that are expensive are going to be just built into everything in the next 10 or 20 years. I'm wearing something that knows exactly where I am. I can talk to it. It can talk to me. It can tell when I've fallen. Matter of fact, last week I stepped on a going treadmill and flipped over, and it said, "I've sensed you've fallen. Have you fallen? Are you hurt?" I didn't fall. By the way, if I didn't answer in 60 seconds, it called 911. It's also got an electrocardiogram in it. So all these things are going to happen, but they got to happen in context to you. So what's machine learning? So machine learning is an implementation of artificial intelligence, which has been around for 60 years. We're in our fourth rebirth of the AI is going to take over the world. So what's different? Well, there's a couple of big things that are different. The first that's different is this term big data. Massive amounts of data. Because if you don't have huge amounts of data, you can't actually train and learn and get it so it can really understand. So I'll give you an example. Voice recognition. There's a company called Nuance that was the best in the world in it. And they had about 1 million samples they used to help the recognized voice. And this company like Google came along, and nuance works pretty well, but accents, colloquiums, miss things. So Google put together a database of 1 trillion, and it can understand almost everything in 50 or 60 languages, et cetera. It takes a huge amount of data because it has to be trained. It has to go through 1 billion repetitions of looking at everything. I'm sure a lot of you seen the video of how the machine vision learns to determine if it's a cat, right? Well, if you only see the tail or the front, and what's the colors, and what's the size, and how does it took Google, I don't remember the number, but it was huge number of billions of repetitions to be able to get to the high 90% that looking at a picture to say that's a cat. So data's one, but the other is you gotta compute like nobody's business. And right now we've gotten to the point where computing capacity is gone through the roof, especially specialized capacity, like the graphics processing units that are built into gaming machines, et cetera. So now we can do trillions of transactions a second by parallelizing those, by running these same kind of calculations on not one computer, but 1,000 computers. So you got to have lots and lots of data, you have to have lots and lots of computing, and then you have to be able to train it. So we've done some algorithmic things. There's an algorithm called, I'm missing it, TensorFlow, that most of the big companies use. And that with some databases, things like Hadoop and others, you can really parallelize these things. So why is that important? It's because it's to really be able to learn all the specifics. You need huge amounts of data and huge amounts of computing power. So I'll just give you one example. I went on a board of a Romanian-based cybersecurity company. Why would you go on a Romanian-based cybersecurity company? Well, they have about 500 million consumer customers. And they started with the machine learning infrastructure in 2008. So they have information and data on cyber attacks on 500 million people that go back for years. They have used the same underpinnings for their corporate customers. So 2 examples. One, the biggest attack last year was something called WannaCry. You probably all heard when the whole health system of the UK went down and all these. This is the only software in the world that didn't infect any of their customers, because the machine learning had figured out how to detect all of the different signs of what was coming, and they figured out what it was. But the more important part is what they do for their consumers. So they actually do machine learning about you and what you do. And they've taken it to a point now you can buy a little box, plug it into your router in your house, and it will learn about everything you do on your computer, everything you do on your mobile device personally. Everything goes through all of the devices in your house. Whether it's your HVAC, your temperature controller, your front doorbell, anything that's on the internet. And once it starts learning that, it can detect any anomaly that's happened, either warn you about it, stop it, et cetera. Even if somebody's trying to attack you through your smoke detector, it will be able to tell that and stop it. Now, so I've gone on a little long, but what I'm really trying to get at is we now have the ability with machine learning to really personalize things. And in the next 10 to 20 years, if we can get the right data sets and the right analysis of it, it's going to be able to, and privacy is a big issue, you hear about that, it's going to be able to say, okay, it has non-personalized data on 100 million people that are on the autism spectrum. And therefore, it can understand what the kind of things that happened and what's positive and what's negative, and what works in actually interacting with those people, and then bring it down to you personally in the situation you're at to help be the coach, be the supplement, the helper in real time. And that's the kind of thing we're talking about. So I ask each one of the panelists to give us different aspects of how they're seeing the benefits and issues with machine learning for us going forward, starting with Nancy Ward. Nancy's part of the Oklahoma Protection and Advocacy Agency, but really interesting, she actually was the editor for the Medicaid Reference Desk, and which is a human-curated version of what we're really talking about that can happen. So, Nancy?
Yeah, thank you. So the desk was designed, and we finally got it in all 50 states to make your Medicaid system user-friendly. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of that. So for physical therapy, in one particular state, it took 57 words to explain what physical therapy was. We got it down to 17 words. And then the other example that I want to share with you is the founder, Albert Johns. What I would do when I was first learning how to explain the desk is I'd call him up before my presentation, put my phone in my pocket. I had a Bluetooth on, and so Albert was with me the whole time I was doing my presentation, but nobody knew that. And then the next thing that I want to share with you is what I do at the Protection and Advocacy. So I do voting, and the Help America Vote Act is very important in my life because I started voting in the 70s, and not until 2010 was I able to vote independently and privately because I couldn't read the ballot. So somebody had to help me do that. So that's definitely a personal example of how machine learning has helped me. And then the last example that I wanted to give you is I get very passionate about things I'm interested in. And so therefore, because I get passionate, my voice fluctuates. And when I'm trying to use Siri or use Google, because my voice fluctuates, it doesn't understand me. And so what I'd like to see us do is develop Siri and Google even further so it could understand the fluctuation in people's speech and also understand when people have and I don't know what to call it anymore. I hate labels, but a speech impediment so that they would be able to understand it and people could use it more.
So thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you very much. So Hobson Lane is a real machine learning expert. He's built systems that actually use machine learning to do real things, AIRA, and I hope you'll tell us a couple secrets about your newest company that you founded.
Certainly. So, thank you. So I'm Hobson Lane. Founded a company called Total Good, where we were focused on open data science, the open data, open science, the whole, and of course the open source. And of course, we're focused on pro-social applications of data science and machine learning, and so I was excited to be able to participate in that workshop that Clayton put together. And a lot of the ideas that came out of that are ready now. There are companies, startups, as well as the large ones you've heard from today, that are building these systems and where machine learning and AI is trained to actually assist people, as opposed to what has been happening over the past 10 years, where it's been largely focused on manipulating us into spending money in the places where they want us to spend money. But Will Scott described during this workshop how at IBM they had a pilot project to employ machine learning and artificial intelligence to monitor the homes of and the facilities where elderly were being cared for, and to order to detect things like did they leave the stove on? Is there a change in their behavior? Did they take their meds this morning? And so that's an example of where this massive amount of data that we've been talking about was used to identify a person's activities and be able to. That's a very difficult problem that would not have been solvable until recently, as self-driving car technology came online, where object detectors that can work efficiently and in real time, and natural language processing and speech processing could be incorporated into these home automation sort of systems and healthcare monitoring systems. That's one promising application is in healthcare and home monitoring and automation. And then Chris Langston at Facebook talked about how this morning how they are allowing the users to self-personalize their experience. So increasing the font size, making that application more accessible to the people. And infrastructure applications like Facebook, the things that we all need to get through our lives, should certainly be tools that are available to everyone. And so it's hopeful to learn that they are at least trying to address it from a self-personalization standpoint. But in addition, some people may not be able to actually navigate the settings because they are quite deep and complicated, and be able to find that setting for the font size on their phone. So in addition to that, they're working to automatically personalize it by collaborating with one of their competitors at Google, who's manufacturing the operating system that a lot of their apps are run on, by paying attention to and respecting the font size preferences of the user at the operating system level. And Google is doing a lot of automation work to recognize the activities on a phone that can be predictive of what kind of font size you want to have, or is going to make the operating system work best for you. So that's another example of where massive amounts of data recorded by Google are being used to identify your activity, and it's being targeted towards the accessibility market, and not because that's where they hope to make money, but simply because it's the right thing to do. And Anirudh Cole also talked at IRA, a startup, a very small company who's very much focused on revenue. Their entire product is an accessibility product. And it's building on this self-driving car technology to build a visual interpreter for the blind. I worked there for a year, and we developed the first prototype of a chatbot that would interact with blind users to describe the world to them. Say there's two people on your left, there's a person on your right wearing mostly red, that sort of information to help someone navigate the world. In addition, their current system has a fallback where you can say, call an agent, and it will call a human agent who can then look at the video and describe it to you in more detail, and of course with the emotional subtlety and companionship that a human can provide. So that service is another really promising application, and it's opening up a floodgate of information and data that's available to IRA internally, and hopefully they'll be able to make that available to researchers like me, so that we can learn from that experience, that dialogue between users and particular users with particular needs, and the types of things they want to see in the world, so that we can do what's called transfer learning in the machine learning industry, we can transfer all that learning about what objects are and how they behave in the world that self-driving cars need in order to avoid pedestrians and to deal with the real world that they can see through their cameras. We can literally take those models and transfer them over and adjust their weights in such a way that they can then be used for these other applications. So there's a massive exponential growth in the application of machine learning to the accessibility community.
Thanks a lot. So Sue Swenson has been a partner for the Institute since we started. You've worked with David Braddock for a few decades, and she has held phenomenal positions, the executive director of the ARC. She's held government positions. She was a Kennedy Fellow in the Senate, and her last position was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Special Education and Rehabilitation in the Obama administration. She's got a big international view on this, and Sue?
Appreciate it. So let me say that the meeting is my natural habitat. And I've discovered that now at age 65. That meeting yesterday is one of the best meetings I have ever been in because there were people from multiple points of view, multiple skill levels, multiple visions of what machine learning can be and what it can mean to people with disabilities. And yet, I think we managed to have a very productive meeting over a whole day. I believe personally we could have gone on for 5 days or perhaps more. And let me try to explain the piece that I think we didn't get to. But first I want to say we carefully discussed some errors, some machine learning that had been investigated that basically wound up with everyone trying to cross the street in their wheelchair who didn't do it in the usual way, getting run over by cars. That was a bad outcome. This was all just computerized. Nobody actually got hurt. But that led to a discussion of outliers and what does it mean to be a person with a disability and how each person with a disability is a mix of different characteristics. And so many people with disabilities are outliers when you look at a Gaussian curve. One of the things that was suggested was a technique, a statistical technique that the person called a lawnmower of justice, that you would cut off the top of the Gaussian curve and just look at the bottom all the way across. So you would end up not cutting off the tails, not cutting off the outliers. And my son certainly was an outlier. It was a real pleasure for me when a school would say, oh yes, we have a program for children like Charlie, and I could say, no, you don't. Because I knew he was a 1 in 5 million diagnosis. So anyway, that problem of outliers is a really big piece of machine learning, and how is it going to work for all human beings if it's going to be supportive of all of us. The second piece I want to mention is I now work with an outfit called Inclusion International. I'm the volunteer president. We are organized and recognized by the UN to represent children with disabilities, their families, adults with intellectual disabilities, and their families. So we're one of 8 disabled people's organizations in the world that's recognized in front of world bodies to talk about human rights. And one of the things we've been asking for 10 years since the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities went into force is we want UN documents and products translated into easy-to-read language. They translate them into all of the main world languages, but they cannot seem to manage to put it into easy-read language so that people with intellectual disabilities can have access to it. And I think the translation capabilities of machine learning were very profound, as I understand, in the progress that has been made with languages. So I think perhaps translating to easy read would be something that we could expect in the near future that would be very important in terms of the ability of the world community to come together and actually discuss what do human rights mean for people with intellectual disabilities. This is not a minor topic. The next thing I wanted to mention is that I think an issue came up that we opened the meeting, someone brilliantly mentioned that dystopian movies frequently feature machines that take over and manipulate people and push people around. And that's a real fear for the mind of the, let's say, 14-year-old male moviegoer who goes to the dystopian movies. I don't. But the idea of trust of machine learning is something that we have to build. And people with disabilities are used to not having any privacy. And privacy is not determined the same way as other people determine it. So yes, my son had privacy when he was in his own home. He had privacy of his documents. But when we were on the street, everybody stared at him. Everybody was looking, and sometimes judgmentally, about what should you be doing, how should you be acting. This is a profound impact on the personalities and the personal opinions of people with disabilities. I think it's one of the most common things that people with all disabilities hate, is being stigmatized or stared at in that way. So the idea is, can we use machine learning to help people not be stigmatized? Can machine learning be used to help everybody else not stigmatize? So if we can put a bug in your ear that says, be brief, can we also put a bug in your ear that says, hey, stop staring at that person, it's really uncomfortable for them? I don't know how much we can do to improve the world by not just by changing the behavior of the disabled person, but by changing the belief system or the behavior of everybody around them. I think that would be interesting. I think the discussion of privacy, though, is going to get very deep very fast with disabled people, and they will need to be warmly welcomed into the discussion. If they're told that technology is going to solve it, they're not going to believe it. They're going to want to know what other kinds of conversations can they have about it. And then the piece that I think we didn't quite get to was really the broad vision of what we were hoping machine learning would do for people with cognitive disabilities in the world, and where, and for whom, and for how many. And that's a really important vision. If it's something that we can guarantee life will be improved for suburban middle-class people in the United States, that's one thing. If we can say that we think machine learning will advance how people live with cognitive and intellectual disabilities in sub-Saharan Africa, it's quite something else. And what we didn't get to, what we kept dancing around, and some people articulated part of this, was that we don't just want to use machine learning to help the person with a disability behave as if they're not disabled. It's not that medical model of fix, but it's how do we help them fit in, and how do we realize, as Bill said, that machine learning is usable by every person, and it's a whole ecosystem, and it's personalization for everyone, and how do people with disabilities do that, hopefully as full partners. Thank you.
So Clayton was the first person that really introduced me to what the potential was with CU, and he's been with us all the way through. He spent a period of time as our chief scientist. He was dean of the computer science department at the time, by the way, at the beginning. He spent a period of time working with Sue back in Washington, trying to help get the policies and procedures, and working with the National Institute of Standards to make it more possible for us to work together. And he's graciously consented to come back and work with the Institute for the next 2 years to help us figure out what we're going to be when we grow up. We're calling it Coleman Institute 2.0.
Oh, you really do have to hold it down. Okay. Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Yeah, well, it was a fire hose of a day. And you've heard some of the themes that were sounded. I'd like to suggest some of the ways forward that were identified for the Institute, but really for the larger community here. So what can all of us do to grasp the opportunities that are here and also avoid some of the potential downsides? Because we did talk a bit about that, especially in the area of privacy and fairness. So we all understand that in a world of data being collected on everybody and everything, there are some exposures there. What we talked about was the need to strike a balance there. So on the one hand, we need to do what we can to protect ourselves and our fellows from intrusive uses of private data. But we also learned that there's risk on the other side. So one of our participants was Blake Reed, who's a member of our law school faculty who's heavily involved in these matters in the policy world. And he was telling us that there's a significant possibility that public concerns about privacy will lead to stringent regulation that may make it impossible for us to develop some of the positive examples that we're all talking about here. So there's a role for this community in engaging with people who are developing these kinds of policies to make sure that the potential benefits as well as the risks are understood and that policies are developed that strike the best possible balance there. So this is something we're going to have to look into. There are a number of other organizations that are working on these matters, and we in this community need to engage with that. You heard from Nancy in particular, and also some from Sue about some of the opportunities in language technology. You heard also from Will Scott about what IBM is doing, and other companies are working on this. But it looks as if there's a role for all of us and the Institute to play in helping to focus some of this energy to help collect appropriate data. So machine learning enterprises frequently run off things that are called benchmarks. So these are kind of sets of standardized problems where people's performance can be scored quantitatively and compared, so that people can tell whether they're actually doing better. So we need to look at whether there's a role for the Institute and this community in providing some benchmarks and measures that can really promote progress towards using this technology to do things like making human rights documents and Medicaid documents, such as what Nancy worked on, really make these things readable. We think the technology is almost in hand to do that, so we need to get behind and push that. We also talked about technology in the area of cognitive assistance. Some of the discussion related very much to the very interesting opening plenary that we had, showing the potential of remote support to not only reduce cost, important though that is, but more important, actually producing a better experience for people. We think that the time is ripe to explore how machine learning, taking advantage of some of the trends that Bill was talking about, may be able to further help matters there. So for example, you saw in the opening plenary that what's done today is to install a variety of sensors, door opening detectors and things like that. We can do those things. It's maybe not obvious that those things are expensive in various ways. It also means that they're not very flexible. If you think about it, we don't, as people, we don't detect doors opening by having door detectors. We see the door opening. Machine vision is advancing very rapidly in the direction of allowing a very general vision system to detect a wide range of things that today require special sensors with the installation and management that are involved there. Plus, to go further than existing systems do, as Bill was saying, in detecting complex patterns of behavior and assigning meaning to those things. So remote support is an area where we think maybe the time is right to do some piloting of a next generation of technology. We also talked about personal assistance, the kind of thing that Bill mentioned. We can have our phones, we can ask for information from the phone. We talked about some cases there. I'll mention one of the individuals who participated in the workshop, Pam Gregory, who shared some of her experience as a brain injury survivor. And she described some of the support needs that she has. And the bad news is that the machine learning experts in the room were unanimous that we're not ready to provide those supports yet. The good news is that there's rapid progress being made in the research world. So we need to keep our eye on what's going to be possible in the personal assistance area. Also going forward, we do have a draft white paper that we'll be producing. So any of you that are interested in this, we'll be putting that up on the Institute website. And I need to give a thank you to all of the participants. There are too many to name, but I can name the organizations, and maybe this will also give you a sense of the breadth of participation that we were able to get, for which we're very grateful. So we had participants from the University of Colorado, the University of Michigan, the University of Washington, the University of Indiana, OCAD University in Toronto. Among companies, we had participation from IRA, Benetech, Facebook, Google, IBM, Microsoft, Rest Assured, organizations, AAPD and NCIA, and I already mentioned as an individual participant, Pam Gregory. So we're very grateful to all of those people for sharing their time with us yesterday.
Well, I want to thank Clayton for putting this whole thing together yesterday. And as you can see, it's a huge opportunity for us. There are still things for this whole community. There's still a lot of things to get done. So I'm just going to go through a little hopeful story here for a couple of minutes. I want you all to think about questions, because I'm sure you have questions. And we have a microphone here, and we'll have about 20 minutes to take questions. So there's a huge amount of potential here for hope, and that we really can have a world that we can connect with, that we have a digital twin that you can interact with, that can interact with you, that can help you in any circumstance. And it can learn, it can improve, and not just because it knows about you and what your strengths and weaknesses are, but because it knows about millions of people who have different aspects of that and what's been successful for them in this kind of a contextual situation to help you, and knows when you're in trouble. I always use this analogy. If I was dropped off in the middle of a jungle in Brazil tomorrow, I'm cognitively disabled. I don't speak the language. I don't know where we are. I don't know how I'm going to get anything to eat. I don't. So the capabilities that we're talking about help everybody. It's not just that they're different for me because I'm dyslexic, which I happen to be in certain circumstances. They are from anybody that is quote unquote normal in that situation. So this stuff is the basic of it is going to be free. This is not going to be one-off stuff if we do this right, because it's good for everybody. And with machine learning, with these huge data sets that get bigger and bigger and bigger, it can understand any circumstance and have learned from hundreds of billions of trillions of iterations of different circumstances, how best to interact with you in these circumstances and whatever the context is. And why is it going to be free? Because we just heard about the machine vision, right? This kind of a watch. The sensor and the whole Internet of Things, these sensors are going to be built into everything. You won't be able to buy a watch that doesn't know exactly where you are, whether you're sleeping, whether you're awake. Is your heart doing good? This has an EKG in it, approved by the National Institute of Health. So it's not going to be expensive. And these capabilities don't have to differentiate between anybody. So there's going to be issues, you've heard about them. There's going to be issues of privacy. What does that mean? Of how do you get access to that, to those kind of data and those kind of models in these kind of situations? But there's a lot of hope there. You know, to solve security problems, we have to be able to really, really understand identity and do it in a way that doesn't share your personally identifying information. Well, if that's true, then why can't that capability on your phone, on your device, et cetera, know about all your information, and you own that information. You can choose under what circumstance and under what type that data can be shared. Now, if my name's not involved with it, I would love to share lots of information about, you know, my health, my circumstances, et cetera, to be put into this whole data access model that can build these models to understand how all of us can live better. So if we can do this right, and this is part of the challenge for the Coleman Institute, you know, to work on and with what Sue's doing internationally, et cetera, to start really making sure all of this can happen. But if we can do this right, in 10 or 20 years, this is going to really help accomplish the original mission for the Coleman Institute. And it's going to be a really, really interesting world. If we can solve these problems, including the identity problem, we'll turn security upside down. Because at any instant, you can let anybody know that something's wrong, and every IoT device around it, you definitely want to share that device. Plus, with the vision kind of capability, you're not going to be able to do any physical crimes anymore. You'll be traced all the way back and forward and doing in the instance, and no way around it. So very interesting. So I thought I'd open up for questions because this is a fast evolving, really promising field, but it's not totally obvious. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, I hate seeing the back of my own head, and I'm also really passionate like Nancy, and I'm going to shake my voice a little bit. So there's a lot of discussion in machine learning, in the machine learning field, about bias in data sets and bias in outcomes, and how can we do machine learning ethically and ethical violations in machine learning. I'm curious to hear more about how much ethics came up in yesterday's discussions. For example, there's this system called COMPAS, which predicts recidivism rates and is used in sentencing, and it has disproportionate impacts on people of color who get. And so, like, and there's a lot of discussion about debiasing data sets and, like, how do we make these algorithms more fair? But then there are ethical concerns, like, even if you made COMPAS somehow not, somehow if you made COMPAS fair, where there were no disproportionate impacts across factors of identity of, like, race and gender and income, to determine an individual person's future on the statistical aggregate of strangers is never going to be ethical. So when we're dealing with machine learning for cognitive disability, it's inherently at risk for reifying societal power structures and bias and stigma, particularly as long as researchers and developers are not actively seeking out how the interactions of these power differentials are active in their work. And so it's an ethical imperative for machine learning and cognitive disabilities to, like, engage intentionally with these ethical issues. And I wanted to know that y'all discussed this yesterday. I need to know that.
So let me first give let me first posit an answer to that I can't totally validate, but it's what I feel. And then we can turn it over to, I think, Clayton to talk about. There was some discussion back and forth on that, quite a bit. As a matter of fact, Unta was leading that. The problem with what that you're talking about absolutely exists, and it's analogous to the 80-20 problem. And it's analogous to this lawnmower problem too. The 80-20 problem is we don't have enough information. We don't have enough data. You know, at the 80-20 rule today, you protect the people, the most people you can, and some others fall by the wayside. Or I'm an HR department, and I got 100,000 resumes coming into IBM a month, and I can't have a person look at every one. So I establish such gross criteria. Okay, doesn't have a bachelor's in computer science, gone. Well, some of the best I've been in my field this field all my life. Some of the best computer science I knew, especially in the 60s and 70s, were musicians, not mathematicians, not computer scientists. So I actually think we've got a lot to go about with privacy and how those rules are set and instantiated. There's going to be a lot of ethical problems, as you pointed out. But this is the hope to get by that, to actually get it down to the nobody's left behind. Clayton?
Yeah, others may want to join, but yeah, we talked a lot about this. You're right on. The draft white paper refers to the recidivism example. So good news, these issues, and it's not just good news that we think about these things as you've stated them, but the big organizations that are working on these things also are thinking about them. But that's not enough. As you did a good job of articulating, there are ways of looking at the situation which make it seem like problems are almost inevitable. And how to deal with that is a major challenge. The lawnmower of justice that was mentioned is an idea that Yuta Treviranus, who's one of the participants, is working on, which is a way of accentuating the tails of a distribution and making sure that attention is paid to everybody and not just the top by sort of chopping off the top. But there are a lot of issues there. And as I said before, we've all got to be engaged in this, as you're saying. Things are happening. Again, there's a lot of good news that major players who are aware of these things. On the other hand, anytime there's money to be made by not paying appropriate attention to these things, which is also a reality here, we've all got to worry about it a lot. So you're absolutely right in identifying this as an issue, and it's one that we've got to address as best we can.
Thank you.
I'd like to sound a little bit of an optimistic note, if I can. I work for a company that has been subject to some really nasty privacy hacks and invasions. Not for nothing, we call our security team the Paranoids. But I think we've been learning from all of our failures quite a bit, and there's money to be made, but there's money to be lost too, as we're also seeing. I'm very impressed with how 23andMe has been handling this. What could be more sensitive than your genetic data? And yet, I signed up for it, and I am constantly impressed on how well they're paying attention to this issue. So like Mr. Coleman, and for a lot of the companies that are learning our lessons, I think we can do it right. And there's a lot of really good discussion going forward now where we're going to do it right. And we have every reason to be afraid, but I think we have reason to be optimistic too.
Thank you. Okay, so one of the things that was really hard for me when we started the Medicaid reference desk is I knew nothing about technology. So one of the things that Albert and I were able to do, and the whole Medicaid team, is that we were able to see each other and have conversations, even though Albert lived in Indianapolis and I live in Oklahoma City. So the distance didn't matter. And all he had to do is say, Nancy, I want you to do some interfacing on the health on the health part of the desk. And I had no idea what he's talking about. So what he did is that he would point to what he wanted me to do, and he wrote directions down for me. So when he did that, I was able to do what he wanted me to do.
Jordan Jankus from the ARC Westchester. Two things that I would love to see. The next presentation is from Bridging Apps, and they have all these apps for cognitive disabilities, which is great, and I deal in this all the time too. But I would love machine learning to relieve the cognitive load that I'm upset. I should know to use the Calm app, or I'm behind my schedule. I have to go to the scheduling app. That's the thing that machine learning could really make a huge difference on and predict things like, you haven't called your mother in 2 weeks. I think every mother in this room would probably like that. But those things that will basically become the intelligent agent that will encompass all these apps. And the other thing that I keep worrying about is, and I don't agree with our president on a lot of things, except our power infrastructure has to be hardened, because all these wonderful things go out the window, like when we had our blackouts in New York. And you have all these people that are relying upon these apps, not just for social interaction on Facebook, but actually to run their lives. What happens if power goes out? You can fix that in 10 minutes.
Okay, so first, I absolutely agree with you. Machine learning should be able to exercise all of those apps in your regard and context of what you're going to do. That doesn't seem like that difficult of a problem, and hopefully apps will develop differently as things go on. I think I do a lot of work with startups or with growth equity software companies, and if you aren't putting machine learning concepts into your applications today, you're not going to get any money from the people who are funding these things. The thing about the electrical utility, well, there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is it is vulnerable. It's been proven to be vulnerable. I was back in 2004, I think the Department of Energy showed how they could burn out the coal production facilities remotely. But it's not as easy as it sounds, because they aren't actually attached to the internet. So you have to spoof somebody to pull out a thumb drive or something and bring it over to the other piece of equipment. And that's phishing anyway, so those things can possibly be done. The good news is the Department of Energy has been the most advanced in cybersecurity for the longest time of any department in the U.S. government. And the utilities, I forget what they call the Association of the Electrical Generation Utilities, share more information than anybody except for financial services, which is about the same in there, because for some very specific reasons. But so you're right to be scared about the electric utilities, and it goes back to we have a very fragile grid.
I'd like to address the question regarding the virtual assistant or the meta assistant to help us choose the right app and at the right time. And the elephant in the room is the profit motive for such a thing. Of course, Google has their virtual assistant, and Microsoft has Cortana, but those are, of course, motivated to direct users towards the applications that they want you to use at the time they want you to use them. And so, but there's hope, because though they are not aware of it, or not somehow their corporate structure is not motivated to deal with it, a good app, an app like you described, that's actually paying attention to you and really attentive to your needs, such as one that we're building for cognitively disabled people or someone who's blind, where we have no choice but to be extremely focused on their needs. Those apps will be trusted by the rest of us much more readily than we trust Cortana or Google Assistant. And so we may start using these apps to help us and relieve our cognitive load. And that will create a huge profit motive for the other companies to pile in, bring their massive resources to play, and build on that capability and build this more ethical assistant into our everyday infrastructure that's building this society that we're all a part of.
Thank you.
One quick thought. Having worked in the federal government for almost 10 years in a couple of different offices, feds are, how do I put this? The United States Civil Service is a flower of civilization, and if you want someone to protect the grid, looking at government is not a mistake, but underfunding the civil service and allowing them to be operating absent the kinds of technologies that we want our very best companies to have is a really big risk to be taking. And I think this is the topic. I've ordered the book, but I haven't read it yet. It comes out today. Moneyball author Michael Lewis's new book is called The Fifth Risk, and it is about the mistrust of government and how it affects what we can expect from our infrastructure and our services and all the kinds of things that we all depend on in the future. So as someone who worked in government as a political observer, please don't discount the civil service as a piece of the answer.